Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to our Azure Back to School session. We're here to talk about Azure Cost Management. My name is Chris Gill, and we're here with Abdul Kazi. I'll give myself a little introduction here. I've been in the industry for roughly 19 years. I consider myself a cloud modern workplace advocate. I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP and MCT. I focus on Microsoft Azure and a little bit on the Microsoft 365 side of the house. Again, you can find me on Twitter. My website's here on this page, and I'd like to hand it over to Abdul so he can introduce himself.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. My name is Abdul Kazi. I've been in the IT industry for almost 20 years now, and actively blog about Azure. I've worked for a Microsoft partner as a cloud architect, and very excited to be presenting with Chris.
Thank you. So let's get started. Our session, again, Azure Cost Management. So diving right into it. What is Azure Cost Management? Well, from the perspective of features available, we have the ability to do cost analysis, taking a look at what services we're utilizing, how much they're costing the organization. We can take a look at that through different tools, whether exporting that type of data over to a location to just store and keep that cost information for historical purposes. We have the ability to take a look at it and crunch in Power BI, getting advanced reporting and some additional insights and forecasting. We also have the ability to set budgets and alerts to keep the customer and keep other parts of the environment or the enterprise up to speed as to what resources are costing the business, where we could maybe cut some of the costs and provide a little bit more optimization. From the perspective of cost management and availability, we just want to let you know that from a traditional CSP, there's no cost management available. However, for pay-as-you-go, for EA customers, for any other of the offerings from Azure, it's a free service and it's turned on by default. So, cost management, the definition, at least from Microsoft and from us as well, is the continuous process of planning and controlling costs. We have this rich visibility into different resources, different parts of the environment within Azure, what's being used, who's accountable for those different pieces and parts of this puzzle, maybe different financial or maybe different IT groups, and then optimization as well. So, full end-to-end approach of keeping cost management under control for customers. Abdul, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so cost management, is top of mind because everybody's moving to the cloud now, and people are, it's a different model. So when we talk about cost management, traditionally on-prem environments are more capital expenditures, meaning you do the investment one time, 5 years, 7 years, what have you, you forget about it. Whereas cloud, it's more consumption based. It's because it's a utility. It's like paying rent. You have to basically pay cost every month. The other biggest challenge is the cost is not constant. It goes up and down because it's consumption based on usage. So that's one of the biggest things that people should be aware of.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
So, one of the things we talked about was, visibility. kind of getting visibility into what our spending trends are. Are we staying within budget? How much are we really spending? Those, like you said, that, an ebb and flow almost of a subscription service, right? Really, at the end of the day, that's what it tends to feel and react as. Again, we mentioned uh, from an Azure cost management perspective, it's built in. It's absolutely 100% built into the environment. It's on by default for almost all the customers. We're seeing that experience has just gotten richer and richer over time, and it's gotten better and um, more insightful for customers and for users. We talked a little bit about the ability to go in and do richer analysis, especially with Power BI. Some of the budget alerting and forecasting also is spot on. It gives folks that need to help make those decisions and help do that cost forecasting, good insights on what is really being consumed and how much it's costing. The ability to have that integration with Azure Advisor is very helpful. To go out and kind of review your environment and give data back on what services you could either consolidate or grow. And again, the call out to this tool it's a free tool available within the environment. For me, one of the favorite things with everything across Azure is least privileged access. RBAC is huge. It's something that should be used, and it gives you that ability to kind of right size permissions for folks that may need to get into this environment, take a look at what's being utilized, and help the business make the right decisions. Abdul, am I missing anything? Is there anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, just a quick comment about cost management. So Azure Cost Management and billing is already, as Chris, part of built-in feature. Some of the other features like Azure Price Calculator, Azure Migrate, which is a tool, Azure Advisor, and Azure Hybrid Benefits. Those are not actually cost management features, but they complement cost management. So if you are looking at cost, so those features should also be looked into, because that definitely is going to make a difference. So for example, if you're moving from on-prem to the cloud, you want to find out, okay, what exactly is our cost going to be? So Azure Calculator is going to be a good starting point, going to give you a good reference point. And then if you want to get more granular and have a very solid understanding of the cost, Azure Migrate is going to be the best bet, because what it does, it takes your on-prem environment, it evaluates, and it says, okay, how's this cost going to look like in Azure, doing the right sizing and everything. Because the biggest challenge we've seen is people, when they're moving to the cloud, they just take the environment as is, meaning they do lift and shift. And as we know, majority of the on-prem environments are underutilized. So if you're taking the on-prem environment and just doing lift and shift, you're wasting money because you're not utilizing the resources properly. So that should be a factor into play as well.
Right. So you're meaning more around just optimizing those services, right? So you don't just want to pick it up as it exists, but maybe try to find a way to kind of optimize and consolidate a little bit more. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, Abdul, is the Azure Hybrid benefit. Or do you find a lot of folks using that, and pros, cons with that benefit for customers?
Yeah, great question. So, a lot of customers who are coming from the on-prem world, they already have the Windows Server license. So hybrid benefits usually work with your Windows Server license or SQL Server license, depending on what kind of agreements you have, enterprise agreement, or let's say if you have the open agreement. So that can complement you going into Azure. So basically what happens is you're not paying extra for the Windows Server licenses. So that's going to save you quite a bit of money. And that's actually a great way for people to move into Azure.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight.
Absolutely.
All right. So next up is cost analysis. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into each one of these topics as the session goes on. But as we mentioned before, cost analysis gives us this ability to really analyze the organizational costs. We got a good amount of details and aggregated information by the organization, so we can quickly identify some spending trends and see costs over time, daily, monthly, quarterly, yearly. And again, those, I guess those types of estimations, as we mentioned earlier about exports, things that we want to keep historical data, that comes into play. So, saving that, maybe reviewing it over time, becomes helpful for a lot of organizations. The ability, as you see here, to kind of look over, very quickly at a glance, to see date ranges and see the accumulated gain over time is huge. The ability to go out and both share and or save and share reports with others in the organization, others that may or be managing this environment, or again, just other financial folks within the organizations that really are responsible for the budgets. They have that ability to go in, review this data. And then again, the nice part is from this perspective, you have filters and scopes that allow you to take a look at, the enrollment or subscription management group or even a resource group level, which is quite helpful for, again, both sides of the house, whether it's a, traditional infrastructure or, architect, or someone who's, responsible for billing and licensing in the environment. Abdul, any other thoughts on cost analysis?
So cost analysis, the other thing is it includes accumulated cost view, and one of the biggest things about is, and we'll see, forecasting is coming in the next couple of slides, but cost analysis actually does a great job of budgeting, because the biggest challenge you've seen is, because this is consumption based, how do we control cost in Azure? Because the challenge is you are going to get hit by the bill after a month, right? So people are like, oh my God, after a month you get the bill and you're like, oh wow, what just happened? So with cost analysis, you can do real-time analysis on a monthly, daily basis to figure out, okay, why is there a spike in consumption? What is causing it? What resources is causing it? So you can go and figure that out. Yeah. So cost analysis is amazing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
So from this perspective, again, we dove into just a little bit of this, but that ability to see, accumulated costs, cost by resource, daily costs, invoicing details. A lot of these views are built in. We have the ability to customize, change the dates. Maybe we want to see it 1 month at a time. Depends on the organization. But again, that we have a good visual as based on the current filters to say, am I on a good trend? Will I stay within my budget for this month? Have there been any spikes? Have there been any increases that I didn't expect? Throughout this past month or so, maybe there was some uptick in business or what have you. Might be some web service, some other balanced service that's running in the cloud that's just consumed a little bit more. I always think of something like Black Friday for most folks, right? How do you manage that massive spike of traffic for, roughly a couple, I'd say maybe a week or two, right? But this would help customers, right, get some good insights into that environment, and maybe plan to say, well, we saw this happen last year around that time. Hopefully we good for business, right? We have that same spike again next year, but
Yeah, and then the built-in views are phenomenal. So that you have a lot of variety, as Chris mentioned. Though, and you can also customize the dashboards. We'll be talking about in the future slides. But yeah, the built-in views are very customizable, and that's what I like about this as well, because each department is going to have their own view, because depending on the larger organizations, everybody is going to be working on their own environment, meaning they might have their own management group, they might have their own subscription level. So they can even take a look and see, okay, what are the spending on the subscription level or on the resource level, and then what resources are causing the most. So from a built-in view, those are amazing.
Awesome. I agree. All right, so invoice reconciliation. From this perspective, again, I personally, I really like the donut charts at the last screen. It's a little, it's a black and white, but again, it really dives down into showing that that ability for a very deep invoicing per service. How much have I used for maybe something like Express Route, Azure Stack. One of the things, and I'm going to even stop myself here too. Abdul, I'm going to put you on the spot again, but one of the things I realized, and to be honest, I just learned this over the past year or so. There are different taxes applied to cloud services depending on where they're located. Would this type of invoicing and reconciliation information kind of help me out as somebody who's trying to help our organization write, the taxes and tax information for these services?
Yeah, so depending on where the subscription is, right? So let's say if the subscription is US, Microsoft is going to bill you in USD. All the taxes are going to be included. Everything is going to be, and it's going to be all inclusive bill. Because we all know what's happening now is a lot of companies are building their HA environment in multiple regions. So US is really an exception. So I'm in Canada. We only have two regions, Central and Eastern. So one is in Toronto, one is in Quebec City. The Quebec City is not a full-blown region. What I mean by that is it does not have availability zones. So if the Toronto region goes down, Quebec City is not going to be a good failover, right? So you probably would be going to the US. So when our customers build high availability and are in the US or let's say in Europe, those bills are consolidated accordingly to the local currency, the taxes, and then they come back. So it doesn't cause any confusion. So for example, if you have a HA in Europe, let's say, and you would be charged in euros, but when your bill comes, it's going to be in your local currency. So Microsoft does a great job of reconciliation of the taxes and currencies and conversion rates and everything.
Awesome. Thank you for that information.
Sure.
So let's hop to forecasted spend, which we mentioned earlier, and we said we would talk a little bit about here. So this is very intriguing to me, and I think this is something I'd say relatively new. A lot of this, I'll be honest, is new to me anyway. So, but the forecasting, it gives some great insight based on past performance and past spend. It gives a little bit of insight moving forward as to, well, here's the services that you have used in the past, based on different resources, whether it be Azure VMs, Azure Stack, you name it. But it gives an idea of what you may run into going forward, and how much you might have to plan for as a incremental spend over time. The nice part is it really gives you that ability to say, I'm budgeting for, I don't know, say $21,000, every month for services, and I set that as a budget. We'll actually see some sections where we've gone over, or potentially we'll go over budget, which I believe gets highlighted in that red, right?
Mhm. Yes, it does. Absolutely does. And this is a different view, but you have multiple views of forecasting. And so basically, it even tells you on a day-to-day basis, saying, okay, how much your spend is going to be. And one of the features I like about cost management is forecasting is it tells you on a monthly basis, okay, at the end of the month, this is going to be your approximate cost. So people can budget, to your point, Chris, right? They're like, yeah, we have 21,000, and are we going to be over budget or not? And what's causing the cost, and go through there. So I'll share a personal example. So I was doing testing on Azure pay-as-you-go environment, and I spin up a Azure Active Directory domain services, which is a PaaS model. So the biggest challenge with PaaS is you cannot turn it on, right? It's not a VM. I had to turn it on. I had to work for a couple of days. I left it on, and then after a week, I was just looking at the forecast, and then I'm like, "Oh, there's a spike! Like, what just happened?" So had to go back, shut it down. But yeah, the forecasting really helped because it said, "Okay, this is going to basically throw you off from a budget standpoint." So forecasting is amazing.
Yeah. Now let's just hope for your perspective, it was somebody else's, borrowed credit card or something,
Oh
right?
yes. Good thing it
Awesome.
was a company account. I'm like, yeah, doing some testing.
Yeah, is there that little moment, don't try this at home, folks, unless you have a large spending account or your financial administrator is fine with your expenses.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. So the next piece is the cost management dashboard itself. So one of the things that I really enjoy about this, and I'll pick one, and then let Abdul pick his piece of it too. But the ability to come in here and say, like, here's the view that maybe I want to design, at least for myself or for my team. I can go create this dashboard, save the dashboard, and share it with other folks as well. Abdul?
Exactly. So actually, if you go to the next slide, Chris,
Sure.
so that actually um,
Perfect.
tells exactly a great picture of what you're telling about, right? Because as I mentioned before, in larger organizations like enterprise customers, they're very siloed. So every team is working on their own projects, and they're creating their own dashboards. So as you can see, there are 6 different dashboards for each different department, and they can track their own costs from that aspect. Now, uh, although this is only maybe on a departmental level, you can also um, go and look at it from a higher level. The finance department say, okay, I'm looking at a management um, group level, and we'll talk about the scope of cost management, how, like, what the scopes are and where you can limit. But obviously, depending on the role on the organization, right? So if it's only a departmental head, they might be looking at their budget for those resources. If it's finance for the entire company, they'll be looking at all up numbers. So having those dashboards is amazing because then it helps with forecasting, it helps with analysis, and you can actually combine and say, okay, why is one department spending a lot of money versus others, and what can we do to make sure that there's economy of scale. Maybe they're not utilizing one service that they could be sharing among themselves, or maybe one department is, let's say, for example, using data lakes, which is really high intense service, rather than maybe using a very low key service. So it really also depends on the workload you would be using or using, that the cost is going to be differ.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the insights.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. And next up, we have cost management reservations. We talked a little bit about this, having that ability to, basically create like a reserved instance, right, for maybe a VM or for, a service. We have that ability to, kind of take a look at, the discounted utilization cost in general, because we've already said upfront that, here's the type of service that we're looking to utilize. Here's the discount we've had, and, kind of flip through and at least choose the different reservations that have been, either available or, signed up for that organization. Abdul, could you talk a little bit about this slide and, around the charge type and what that kind of brings to this table?
Yeah, so reservation, as you rightly pointed out, that those are reserve instances. So I guess the biggest question that I usually get is, why even do reserve instances? So the beauty of reserve instances, or the concept, is you're paying for resources upfront.
Hmm.
So basically the same price, right? You're locking in the price for 1 year or 3 years for those resources. Now, the only challenge there is, hopefully your workload remains the same. So let's take a look at a virtual machine, okay? Let's say you're using a D series virtual machine now. Um, let's say for Active Directory. Active Directory utilization doesn't change much, right? Because
No.
It's pretty much standard. So you can do a reserve instance on that, and then you should be good to go. The good thing is, when you do reserve instance, you're locking the price for 1 or 3 years. So even if Microsoft changes the price, it's not going to affect you. On the flip side, let's say if you are using, let's say, database, you're running your customized SQL server on a VM in an IaaS, infrastructure as a service. And then I'll use the example, going back to Chris's example of Black Friday. Utilization might go up and down. If you have done reserve instances, there is going to be some kind of havoc, because then you cannot obviously go down. You can go up, higher level, and you'll have to pay out of whatever the cost is going to be. So those are the challenges. So what I recommend is, do reserve instances on the resources that are going to be fairly constant and not going to change. The other thing people have also mentioned is, okay, for example, our office environment is only 8 to 5. So rather than doing reserve instances, we're just going to shut down the VMs, and then they can come up. Sure, if that works for your environment, that's fine. Sometimes, people say, okay, we want the VMs to come up right away. And so that would be a better option rather than shutting down. The other thing is, there's also something also known as spot instances, which is comparable to reserve instances. But the problem with that is, there's not a higher SLA on spot instances, and Microsoft can take away those resources within a notice of 1 minute or 3 minutes, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So people like, yeah, I want to use a spot instance. I'm like, no, not in production, because if it's a production workload, that's going to be a problem. Sure, if you're running monthly query or something, you have a payroll system and you have to do a monthly payroll. Sure, spot instance might work in that scenario, but I would not use it for production. So you have to really think of the use cases where you can use reserve instances, spot instances, shut down machines and whatnot.
Awesome. It's fantastic insights. Thank you. So moving on to the export features. Again, rather than really hopping into this environment and taking every month a download of what's going on, you have this rich ability to say, I want to go out and schedule this on a monthly basis. Save it, I believe, as a CSV format off to storage account. But it's completely integrated into cost analysis. So I have that ability to say maybe daily, weekly, monthly. Go ahead and take that, throw it off to a storage account. Allow me to keep that rich history for either review at a later time, or combining that type of data with how each one of the businesses are utilizing or kind of keeping track of this information in their own environment. So you could basically combine that with your own custom data, add some richness to it, maybe cost centers or whatever that marry up per organization. And then take that type of export and even bring it into your own internal dashboard, for review for others in the environment. Abdul, anything that I missed here?
Yeah, so the beauty of this, as Chris mentioned, that you can do a daily, weekly, and monthly basis export right into CSV format. The good thing I like about it is native Azure storage, so you can throw this on a blob storage. As you know, blob storage cost is very minimal, and then depending on what you want to do, there probably, because you're doing this maybe for archival purposes, you can even do cold archive. Oh, sorry, cold storage rather than doing hot, which is cheaper.
Right.
And then a lot of companies, what they do is they'll pull out this information, pull it into their PSAs and billing system. So, could be other financial softwares that they're using, maybe Sage or QuickBooks or what have you, and they would basically bill their end customers. So yeah, this is an amazing feature, and it's good because then it's all automated, right?
Right.
We're all about automation now, and this actually does a great job of automating your export, so you don't have to worry about manually and doing it on a day-to-day basis or monthly basis.
Awesome. Yeah, and for me, I'm always forgetting something. So the nice just to go out and say set it and forget it and move on. But awesome. All right. And one of the amazing things about this now too is this isn't just for Azure, right? So we have that ability now to manage and kind of get insights on cross-cloud spend. So AWS fully supported, and we can see the rich insight inside of Azure Cost Management. The nice part is we could see both of those environments. So if we are, multi-cloud, right, and we have split services across both AWS and Azure, we have that ability to see that cost kind of unified in one spot for both of those environments. So, Abdul, any other thoughts on this piece?
Yeah, so if you have a multi-cloud environment, a lot of companies are using third-party tools, but if you want to stick to the native tools, Azure honestly does a great job. So on the AWS side, billing can be a bit complicated because they have many services, and each service is kind of kept separately. But even on this, what you can do is spin up, a S3 bucket in AWS, just like you would do the storage. It throws out your reports, and in AWS, it's known as CUR, cost and usage report. So all the data is integrated as from an AWS standpoint. So yeah, Azure Cost Management does a great job. And then you can export out the reports in CSV files or zip files and export it out from there, and then import it into your own accounting software.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. And last but not least, Power BI or PBI connector and template app. So again, we mentioned earlier, in the case where the dashboards within Portal just aren't, they are cutting it. They're not as rich as you really need, and you want to dig a little bit more, or you want to have that drill through functionality. You have the ability to connect Power BI right into that environment, the Azure Cost Management environment. So you've got, again, that ability to kind of get your recommendations, your different views. If you have folks within your organization that are responsible for building reporting and building, different dashboards. You know, you basically say, here's a way to kind of get to this. Here's the rich reports that maybe our finance department or whomever want to really see, and kind of delegate that off to somebody else to have a more rich Power BI approach to the environment. Any additional thoughts, Abdul?
Yeah, as you said, Power BI is very, very powerful, amazing tool. And given that cost management built-in features are limited, so if you want to complement Power BI connector with cost management, you can get amazing reports, you can get amazing data, and then you can play with the data, right? Like Power BI is mainly a data play, so you can massage your data however you want to play the data. It's going to be phenomenal. So, and I haven't had much time to play with the Power BI, so I'm not really an expert on that piece. But I've seen what magic it can do. But yeah, it's amazing. Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you for your insights.
No, absolutely. So now we're going to be moving to the accountability phase, which is the second phase. So let's talk about that. So in accountability, right? I've kind of mentioned about the scope of cost management and how everything comes into play. So as you might be aware that when you're setting up the Azure tenant from the ground up, you would get a root management group from the get-go, right? Once you have the root management, then you can set up subscriptions, then you can set up resource groups. Under resource group, then you have all the resources. So it's really a layered approach. So from a cost management standpoint, you have to define how is everything going to be defined. So for example, let's say the finance people, they want to have a bird's eye view of the cost. So they'll probably be looking at from a management group standpoint. That's why we have the management teams up here. The financial teams, they might have limited visibility. So that's why they'll have limited visibility, and you'll restrict the access based on that. So it really depends. So what it boils down to, you have to start figuring it out. Okay, who has access or who should have access and to what? Same concept when you are on-prem environment. Finance is pretty much, is looking at all up numbers. Then the actual department or business unit, they're only looking at their numbers, right? So this definitely helps clear out any confusion.
Awesome.
Anything to add, Chris, there?
Again, I just, I think of it as it's nice to really kind of split that up because again, I find at least some organizations it's very much this is an IT thing, and it really isn't. It's this is a business thing. It's owned across the entire organization from the business managers to the accounting and finance teams to the IT team. So it really, really comes down to it's like, yes, IT is helping you deliver this service, but we still have some accountability for these types of apps or this service delivery, whether it's an HR tool or a finance tool or what have you. So yeah, that's that helps at least kind of delineate and not put as much, I would say, not as much burden on the IT groups, because it, again, might not necessarily be just the IT budget. It's a budget for the organization as a whole.
That's a great point, actually. And a lot of companies, what they're starting to do now is they are building up their fin ops practices, so financial ops practices, and which looks at the cloud, and those are mainly agnostic. So could be all the three public clouds, their internal cloud, other private clouds they're in, and then yeah, so that does not even need to be IT per se. To your point, Chris. So yeah, that's absolutely a very good point there. So as I mentioned before, there are different layers. So now, from a cost management standpoint, when you're setting up when you're setting up actually your Azure environment, and when you're going through the landing zone process, you can define where you want to have the scope for each resources, or for each department. So you can even go on the top level, so which is usually the root of the management group. So you can have scope there. If you um, give permission to that scope, then by inheritance, anything under would be accessible. So that's also one of the things that should be considered is, okay, maybe finance has full access because they're part of the management group scope, but let's say the application team, they only need access to their billing data, not any other, not the marketing team. So their scope is going to be limited to just the application team management group, not the root one. So you have to be careful on that piece as well.
Awesome. Awesome.
And so these are the built-in roles. I know Chris mentioned about the RBAC. So just like on-prem, start with the least privileges. So no owner, never define any, or never give any owner access, contributor access, because you want to make sure that you're providing the built-in roles, which are much better rather than just giving the keys of the kingdom. And the good thing about it is, although the owners and contributors are here, as you can see, you need to take a look and see why do they really need an owner role or contributor role, because that comes with a lot of privileges and responsibility. Even the contributor role, they can do a lot of things. So you want to make sure that they know what their responsibility is, why they want access, and then go from there. So for example, the billing reader, they have read access to billing information. So what's happening with the finance department? Mainly they're trying to collect data. They're not going to be ingesting any data into Azure. So read only access is more than enough for them, because they're just pulling out data. They're going to take it to maybe in another system, QuickBooks or Sage or whatnot, and they're basically massage it to their needs and then go from there. So yeah, RBAC is very important. And what I've seen is a lot of people that sometimes they're like, yeah, they don't define it properly. They're like, yeah, we'll just give access on the root level and be done with it. I'm like, no, you need to define what access are you going to be providing, and that actually really is important when you're setting up your landing zones. That piece actually comes in, because one of the best practices of landing zone is setting the proper management group, setting up proper subscriptions, and how RBAC is going to be all set up there.
Excellent.
So Chris, anything you want to add before I jump to the next slide?
I'm just chuckling to myself a little bit. I'm thinking landing zones. That sounds like another session for another time. So
It does. It does. We'll definitely do a session on landing zones. Yes. And then, as I mentioned, the scope actually, is hierarchical. So if you put down the hierarchy on the root, that's going to come to any subsequent management group or subscriptions, or to end up to the resource groups as well. So the beauty of cost management from a scope standpoint is you can assign scope on a management level, on a resource RG level, subscription level. So depends what type of access you want to give out. The other thing which is also very important is tagging. I see a lot of companies lagging on tags and not doing tags properly. They start with tagging, and because tagging gets complicated, the biggest challenge I've seen is maintaining tagging properly. So one, you need to have a proper naming convention for tagging, because I've seen mix up naming convention. They started with something and then they started out with something else, and it becomes a hodgepodge. And tagging actually is going to help you, because a lot of companies, what they do is they do internal billing, especially on the enterprise level. If they're massive big companies, they're do internal billing. So Microsoft would bill, let's say, a company for the entire consumption, and then within that company, the finance department is going to basically bill each LOB, line of business, for their consumption. So how do you figure that out? By tagging. Tagging is the best way of doing it. You can tag all your resources and then go into cost management, and then basically, it makes it easier for you to do it from that aspect.
And I would think, at least from my perspective too, I would think that this comes into play a lot with like M&A, like mergers and acquisitions, where you've got two or more corporations that are coming together, and if you don't have this rich tagging in advance, a good sound naming convention, aside from the resources themselves, just the tagging, that comes into play huge. And God forbid if you have two organizations that haven't done this at all for any tagging, I'm sure that would make things a little complicated. So
That's going to be interesting. Exactly. And the good thing now is you can do tagging by policies as well, and infra code. You can use ARM templates. You can use Terraform for tagging and policies. So, and you can enforce tagging on resources. So, for example, anytime a new VM is created, you can enforce tagging and say, okay, by policy, it has to be tagged, so the tags are not being missed. So there are absolutely check and balances in place to make sure that things are properly done.
Beautiful.
So now let's talk about budgets. So budget is very important. As we were talking about, when we started that, about forecasting and the analysis and whatnot, budget is going to come into play, because you would have, everybody has a set monthly budget. So even think from your personal aspect, right? We have a set monthly budget. Okay, this is how much money we're going to spend on a month-to-month basis and whatnot. So what budget does from a monitoring and notification standpoint is you set up a monthly budget, and it sends you alerts and say, okay, you have passed that threshold, what you set on a monthly basis. So, and you can go and define the budget yourself, but it's also, cost management also does a great job of recommending budgets as well based on the history.
That's right.
So yeah, it's a phenomenal tool, and it's all automated.
Excellent.
You're going to say something, Chris, there?
No, this is just, it's excellent. I really, again, that integration just with the forecasting, I think for a lot of places, huge. Whether you're just getting started or whether you're seasoned veteran in this, in this environment, we still, it's like day in and day out. I know I said set it and forget it before. That was for something else, but we really can't anymore. just set something and forget it. It's like we still have to stay on top of it and manage it. So that forecasting and cost analysis on an ongoing basis is very, very powerful. So
Exactly. And so right now, this is something in private preview. So as you might be aware that Microsoft has two kind of previews. One is private preview, which is really internal and probably people like Chris, MVPs get to see, and special companies and whatnot. And there's public preview like me, open to the public. Anybody can go test it out. So this feature of cost management right now is in private preview. And hopefully once this comes in GA, it's going to be amazing because you can allocate shared cost now from a subscription level, from a resource group level. Tagging is going to be much easier. So, and as you see, Microsoft is making Azure, robust every day. They're adding more features, so make it easier for people. So I think this is a great add-on there.
yeah, I think so too. It looks like a great feature, and I know, with any of these tools from Microsoft, especially at the top, usually if there's any kind of feedback, if it's anything that, it just isn't working right, or something else that you'd like to see, it's like, to either fill out the bug or fill out that preview button and, get the feedback. They're actively listening, and there's plenty of change to come. So
Exactly. So that's another private preview markups. So that should be coming up. Hopefully, obviously Microsoft doesn't tell us when things go, into GA. So for example, like Azure Blueprints, it's still in GA, and I'm like, it's been forever. When is that gonna go into, sorry, it's in preview. When is it gonna go into GA? So yeah, sometimes we have no idea when Microsoft is really gonna put something in GA.
But they're all great resources, so we'll take them.
Oh, exactly. Oh no. And the funny thing is sometimes even when I look at services in public preview, and by the time they come, GA, a lot of things have changed. I'm like, oh wow, okay. So yeah, you never know. You never know. It's like, and they even said that things might change because based on the feedback they got from the community and people and whatnot. So yeah. So now let's move into our last module, if you will. So optimization. And this mainly talks about, how do you optimize cost. So I've kind of talked about, reserve instances and those kind of things, but there are a couple of things we can do for cost optimization. So first thing is, so this is a great example, which talks about, from a developer standpoint, is they take VM1, which is a huge VM, and then they take VM2 and 3, which are smaller VMs, and they combine them together to make VM1, right? And the cost is going to be different because the bigger the VM, the bigger CPUs, and depending on what you're using, if you're using any GPUs, that is going to be, the cost is going to be really out of whack. So you have to use the proper assessment, if you will, of what the resources should look like.
So let me ask you a question, Abdul. From your experience, do you feel that a lot of folks, a lot of customers get into this environment and it's maybe an eye-opening experience to say, oh man, I didn't realize that excuse me, I didn't realize that maybe I had a ghost VM or a monster, service that's just sitting out there and accruing costs, like you mentioned earlier about your, Azure ADDS, instance. But, how many folks do you find that maybe it's a surprise that, right out of the gate, they're like, oh my goodness, there's something running out here that I didn't realize was running.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So I was talking to one of the customers, and when they started doing Azure was so new, they didn't have any governance policies. And the problem with that is it was free for all, meaning all the developers were going in, they can spin up any VMs. There were no locks, there were no restrictions. They did not standardize on, okay, you can only use these kind of families for virtual machine, let's say, D size or F size or whatnot. Yeah, we've seen those things. And the other thing is, and for production too. So I can see if you're using some of this environment heavy built in non-production or testing, then that's fine. But obviously with testing, you can use your own non-production subscription. So you can definitely use MSDN or other subscriptions like Azure sponsorship and what have you. But in production, you have to be careful. And that's why you have to, governance is really key. And that also comes with when you're setting up the Azure landing zone, you have to set up the governance. And there you can even put place policies as well, saying, okay, that not everybody can spin up all the VMs. So you can put restrictions on, for example, GPUs. Those VMs cannot be spin up because those are very expensive.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, those are not even available in Canada. So, so yeah, hopefully soon, but not right now. But that's one of the things about strategy. And that's where the cost comes in. People are so focused when they move to the cloud and the technology and how that's going to look like, they do not actually consider the cost.
Yeah.
And even from a technical aspect, right? We even when we architects, we're so ingrained about security and, okay, how does the architecture look like? Oh, okay, from an NSG standpoint, is this NSG secure, or how is the external firewall coming in and all those things? And we don't assess, okay, right now we have our environment mainly as IaaS, infrastructure as a service. What's going to happen if we move that to PaaS, and how much cost saving is that going to be? Sometimes that really is a afterthought. That's what I'm finding. But that is changing now because people know that cloud is evolving. When it was new, everybody wanted to do lift and shift and wanted to get into the cloud, and that was their foot into the door, if you will. But now, as their cloud practice is maturing, they're looking at moving into PaaS services, and PaaS is obviously is going to be cheaper. So that's where you can also save a lot of cost too.
Awesome insights. I love it.
And then, as Chris mentioned earlier, you can really use Azure Advisor. It does provide you amazing recommendations. It does provide you cost. So the ones I've seen on the Azure Advisor is reserve instances, which we talked about. The good thing is reserve instances you can do not only do for virtual machines, you can do it for databases as well. You can do for storage as well. Storage is going to be limited what you can do. So for example, if you are doing premium storage, then you can only reserve instance P30 plus, nothing under that. You cannot reserve instance standard storage. Databases, Cosmo DB, I believe you can reserve instance. So obviously there are limitations of what you can do reserve instance, but you cannot. But that's actually a good way of you to looking in your environment because in the traditional or on-prem environment, we set something up and we just left it for 5 years or 3 years, depending on the refresh cycle, we didn't take a look and never optimize it. But cloud is so intelligent now that you can even optimize on a monthly basis, because it's going to give you insights and say, yep, from the monthly trends, this is what's happening, you should change, and this is how the cost savings is going to be. And Azure Advisor not only provides you recommendation from cost, it does high availability, it does security, performance, and security is big. So if you look at Security Center, which is another topic and another probably session, um, Azure Advisor does a great job on the security side of things, and depending on what the workload is and what services you're running.
Awesome. So let me ask one other question. I know, for most of us, well, I shouldn't assume. So for anyone who isn't, anyone who's new to this, I know Microsoft does a great job month by month. They publish out on the Azure Cost Management and Billing blog, but they publish out, here's new ways, like new features, new ways to save with Azure and Azure Cost Management. Does the Azure Advisor take into consideration like any of the free services that Microsoft makes available? Do they like recommend, for instance, maybe, the app service environment, V3 is now, it's incrementally a little bit cheaper to run and, different services. Is that something that comes through as a recommendation in Advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. So depending on what you're running, it takes a look at your utilization and says, yep, you should move to this service, or this is going to be a better service, or you can downgrade, or you should even upgrade because resources. So yeah, and obviously, with Security Center and even Azure Advisor, their scores, Microsoft actually does a scoring basis now, so you can take a look and see how that works. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you for that information.
Sure. I know we kind of talked about this quick already, but VM right sizing is one of the biggest things that I've seen from a cost standpoint. People do not right size the VM. And you'll be surprised, undeleted or deleted unused resource, right? What happens is sometimes people say, okay, I'm going to test this out. They shut down the environment, but the challenge is there's still cost. So if you shut down the environment, let's say if you shut down the VM, you're still paying for networking, you're still paying for storage. You might not pay for commute, but yeah, so there are other costs as well. So you have to figure out, okay, what costs are going to be there. You can, as mentioned, you can save on VM reservation, which is reserved instances. So yeah, that's going to be there too. And yeah, it depends. And then snapshots. A lot of companies are starting to use snapshots as well. So that's going to save on your data cost, depending on your retention, your policies, compliances. So it's hard to say what fits for everybody, because every company has different requirements, and especially what dictates the cost is mainly compliance, I would say, because compliance and because they have to pass with different audits, and they have to make sure that they're retaining data. So some companies, for example, have to retain data for, let's say, 7 years for accounting purposes or legal purposes. That's a huge cost now, because the amount of data is going to be stored for 7 years, and they have to have multiple copies and make sure that it's in multiple places. And so yeah, that's going to be a lot of cost. So you have to make sure that you're planning all that accordingly as well.
Awesome. And I wanted to share something that as I was preparing for this session too, I found it astounding that one of the numbers that it found published by Microsoft was that just simply utilizing the Azure Cost Management and these optimization features, we could potentially reduce your total spend by anywhere from 20 to 34% is what they were reporting. So, again, it's like light bulbs on. It's like for folks that aren't using this, please, go in, get yourself accustomed to this information, because you could certainly save yourself and your businesses a ton, just by kind of reviewing this, and like you said, potentially deleting unused resources, or just kind of doing some cleanup. Going back to school and cleaning up at the same time, I guess.
That's a great point, actually. Yeah, that's exactly. And then coming back to that, this is a perfect segue to get into right size and idle VM shutdown recommendation, right? So it even tells you which VMs needs to be right size and which are idle. So either you can shut them down, or you can do reserve instances. So yeah, Azure Advisor does a great job of that. These are some regular metrics for virtual machine usage that also can play into cost management. So I'm not going to go into detail, because that we can talk about this forever. But yeah, I just want to give a really high level overview of that. So it has a lot of features, and depending on what you want to really use. So, like for example, the right size sample dashboard. So it gives you a dashboard where you can say, okay, what exactly is going to be the right size? How can we do it? What is the trend? It looks at the previous data to provide the right size, because it's not going to just put a number out there. It's just not going to throw a number. It does a lot of calculation in the back end, because it has to figure out, okay, what about CPU utilization, memory utilization, storage utilization, how often is that being used? So those all factor go into right sizing. And generally speaking, what I've seen in my experience is people tend to over provision rather than under provision, because they're coming to the cloud. They know, and coming from on-prem, because on-prem usually we over provision because we know that it's hardware. That's why we buy a big piece of hardware and say, okay, yeah, that's going to last us for a couple of years, because we're doing capacity management, right? From on-prem standpoint, where in Azure, capacity management is on the fly. So, for example, if you want to change the VM size, boom, you can do it fairly quickly. On the flip side, if you want to move from a managed disk to manage this, yeah, that's going to be a painful process. It's not as easy to do that. So really depends on how are you doing right sizing. So you have to really plan it accordingly.
Excellent.
Yeah, we've already talked about reserve instances. Potential savings for 3 years. You can do even 1 year, and the tool also recommends this. So it's already in there, so people just can go and reserve it.
Excellent.
The BI tool, we talked about this, the reservation coverage. So BI tool, it's going to give you much more granular data of how things going to look like, and better charts and better information to make a better informed decision. Chris, feel free to jump in if there's anything you want to add.
Again, I mean, I've had a little bit of fun with Power BI, so it's, again, it's just sometimes you can drill to your heart's content, but yeah, the nice thing is really, being able to just take a report like that at times and say, this is something visual, something visually appealing. For us, the architects behind the scenes, we see all the, SKUs and whatever else, but to walk in with, a couple donut charts or something that, at least paints the picture of what's going on, just helps ease that conversation a little bit more, in my opinion. So.
No, exactly. So I guess now we're kind of switching gears and talking about Azure reservations, which we've already talked about quite a bit. And so Azure reservation is, basically just reserving the resources upfront, and the a huge amount of cost savings. So according to this, you can save up to 75% over pay-as-you-go model. So basically, pay-as-you-go is so you have consumption subscription pay-as-you-go, but even on the enterprise level, you're paying at pay-as-you-go, meaning it's consumption based. So a lot of people get that confused. They're like, "Oh, I don't have a pay-as-you-go. I have an enterprise agreement." But I'm like, okay. The point being is you're still paying based on your consumption. It's not a flat fee or a fixed fee, right? So this Azure reservation gets you into a fixed monthly fee for the next 1 year or 3 year for that resource, particular resource. So the good thing here is they're also adding VM, SQL Server, and Cosmo DB. I'm seeing a lot of uptick with Cosmo DB. A lot of people are starting to use that, and I'm glad Microsoft is making that part of the reservation as well.
Yeah. Well, that's nice, especially with Cosmos, because it's a geographically dispersed approach to database services. So there's a lot of resiliency. I can see why they've, kind of made that available. But yeah, I've always, when I looked at reservations, I've been, more traditional looking and saying, we talked a little bit about lift and shift, but, folks that are taking, maybe the first steps into the cloud. It's not a bad idea. It's like go out and run that, whether it's Azure Migrate or whatever tool to just go and say, here's what I'm running, and kind of give an estimation for setting that reservation before you even begin. It would definitely help, and then we can go back and check later and see how we're doing, and always adjust if we need, right? Based on right sizing. So.
Exactly. So that's a perfect example right there. So from an instance size flexibility, as we can see, I've kind of thrown the term D series. So with the virtual machines, you have the D series, and depending on the series itself, you can have different core levels, different um, memory and whatnot. So this basically shows the life cycle of how you would move and how the instance size flexibility is going to work. So yeah, this is amazing because a lot of people, what happens is are moving forward, right? Like our data is not shrinking, if you will. It's always growing. So I don't foresee people coming back. So let's say if they have the larger size and they're like, yeah, our data is shrinking, we want to downsize, that doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
But if they started with a really big VM and it was already over provision and stuff, yes, I can see that coming back to downsizing. But um, generally speaking, they're always going up and up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really the example that goes into from a OS agnostic standpoint and how the VMs are going to work and all that.
And I'd give a quick nudge to, again, going back to some of the stuff that we've seen change over the past, even month or so. I believe in June, we're talking about, D series, and I believe the DCSV2 virtual machine, there was actual price reduction on confidential computing. So it's like a 30% reduction. So nice to see. It's you still have that flexibility, but there may always be a surprise every once in a while to say, hey, you fit into this mold, but you're going to get a little bit of cost savings because something's changed, maybe for the better behind the scenes.
Absolutely, exactly. And then for this slide, this is just an overview about the cost management. I know we've talked quite a bit about cost management, but this gives a great overview about the product page. As Chris mentioned, Microsoft keeps changing. And the good thing is they keep the documentation up to date. So whatever the monthly updates come out, they always publish that in those blogs. So those are phenomenal. And yeah, so the it's going to improve because Microsoft has to improve cost management because that's becoming more and more prevalent now because the more people are getting into the cloud, the more the consumption is, and they want to understand what their cost is. And I think cost management is going to be better with time.
Awesome.
So that was our session.
Yeah. And I would just say this, hopefully you all had as much fun as we did putting this together and sharing our insights and tips and tricks with you all. So thanks for tuning in. Abdul, thanks for, I don't know if we even mentioned, but it's like we're just over the pond. So I'm located in Rochester, he's in Toronto, so we're kind of waving to each other across the lake. So
Yeah, but Chris, thanks for co-hosting with me. It was fun. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. And hopefully it was useful.
awesome. Thank you. And thanks,
So
Abdul.
thank you so much. Have a good one, everybody.
Take care.
Bye bye.